Hi, I'm Dr. Teena Cahill, and welcome to Wisdom Beyond, a lively chat show where I get to talk with all of my friends like Dr. Valerie Brooks-Klein. Hello, Valerie.
Hi, Teena.
Hello, Dr. Valerie. How are you doing?
I am fine, Teena. And yourself?
I'm doing great.
Terrific.
Now, you are a psychologist,
Yep.
but you've done everything. You've worked, you've taught, you've headed a child study team, you work with a lot of kids, you do a lot of testing, and we kind of know you around the trade as working with some of the kids that have great strengths, but we've got to find them.
That's right. That's right. That is true.
We want to put this
right.
in the right.
That's
the kid
right.
that might have had some problems in school, or may have had difficult time with learning disabilities,
Right.
or ADD, or whatever the issues are.
Right, and from the perspective of the teacher or the parents, one of those challenging children.
Challenging child,
Yes.
yes. Well, they're all challenging in their own special ways.
Yes.
But you know I talk about caregiving all the time, and I've decided not to talk about caregiving anymore. Many of you know I'm a caregiver for my husband, Brooks, but I've decided not to be a caregiver anymore. Brooks and I are care partners. And Brooks is not much more than a care receiver. I'm much more than a caregiver. So I'm changing the model. Well, when we have a difficult kid, I certainly know the divorce rate in some of the situations with difficult kids, how high those divorce rates are. And I think quite often the mother, or sometimes the mother and the father, feel as if, you know, they're a caregiver for life for this child, depending on the situations. And you know, to be a caregiver, it feels isolating. You feel alone. You feel like you can never relax. You know, all the studies, we're all supposed to like have all these problems, and I just refuse to have the problems. So we're going to call it care partnerships, okay? And so
I like that.
Yes, and so what I want people to understand, and what you want people to understand, is if they have a challenging child, they're in a care partnership relationship with professionals such as you, with the schools, hopefully with the community, hopefully with the you know, federal government in terms of providing support or whatever they do. So let's talk. Let's say I have a challenging child. And you know, they're all children are challenging, as are all parents and grandparents in some special way, right? And so, as a care partner, what do I do? I mean, maybe this kid is not paying attention. Maybe he or she's on the computer all the time. Maybe they're having violent outbursts. Maybe they don't have any social skills. Maybe the teachers are mad at them all the time. Maybe I can't get them to do their homework. But maybe, as their mom or their grandma, I know that they're really smart. I can see those strengths. I just don't know how to access them. So what do we do?
That is so true, and what we want to try and do is that we want to foster success. And we want to, like you were saying, try to identify the strengths and try to figure out what the weaknesses are so that they can learn to compensate for them.
And so what I believe, and I know you believe this too, and it really comes out of cognitive behavioral psychology, is the most important thing is to see what's right, not what's wrong. Of course, we have to deal with certain things that are dangerous or protection or just we can't let kids get away with. But what we really want to do is look at these kids as we look at ourselves and somebody else and see what is right with them, not what's wrong. But how do you know that you're right when you think, well, I think this kid, you know, is talented in this area, but you know, maybe I'm his mom, maybe I'm not sure I'm right. How do you go about figuring that stuff out?
Well, this can become a very complicated process, and this is where you want to start this collaborative partnering process and find other people to put on your team.
Yeah, so first of all, we start with saying, I am not alone. I am not the only person that may have a challenging child, and I have to assemble a team. Okay, who do I want on my team?
Well, of course, I'm partial to psychologists
because
we are trained in a broad spectrum of areas, all types of cognitive activities. We understand education, we understand learning and memory and emotions and their impact on all of those functions. Basically, we want to optimize their functioning.
So let's talk about that for a second, though, because there are a lot of different professions, and some of them do it very well, that are out there sort of diagnosing these different problems in kids. But let's understand that the research into how memory works is really, I used to teach learning theory in a graduate program, so really comes out of the psychological field.
That's
learning, we know, is really a hypothetical construct. We can't see learning. We have to measure learning.
That's right.
We can't
measure
really
the
see it.
outcome.
We have to measure the outcome. So psychologists are trained in measuring outcomes of certain behaviors, certain techniques, certain strategies for approaching things. So the first thing I want to do is talk to somebody that can really look at potential applications for this child,
Right.
testing or treatment or whatever, but with measurable outcomes.
That's right.
Not just somebody's best guess.
Right.
Okay.
And this is a big buzzword in education right now, response to intervention. Okay? Because we want to have an idea, and this brings me to the concept. It's called zone of proximal development. We want to understand.
Zone of proximal.
I love that.
Zone of proximal development.
Zone of proximal development.
Okay,
Have
I
an
know that term.
understanding of where, whether it's a student, this is true for employees, have an understanding of where they are within a certain skill. And where so many people fall short is that their expectation is so far beyond what their current skill level is. So that's why it's important to understand where they are currently. And this is where, again, working as a team and collaboratively, I mean, we teach teachers how to maybe assess informally their reading level.
Okay.
They can assess their writing level.
Okay.
They can just have a better understanding of who they're dealing with and where they are.
So on the way to seeing what's right with a kid, now you're refining this, and you're saying, okay, a teacher may say this child has gifts in, or it has strengths in language arts, but what does that mean? Does that mean this child is going to become a Hemingway, or does that mean this child can write a sentence?
Well,
That's really what you're saying.
Right. It
So
can
you
mean
have
different
ways
things.
to assess
Right.
within the strengths. What is the not the maximum, because there's never a maximum. We all have great potentials. But what is a reasonable expectation where we would start the teaching process, the skill development?
That's right.
Where would we start the skill development? Okay.
Well, that's what we want to find out.
I know, that's what I'm
Right,
saying.
and that's what we need to be aware of.
All right.
And so this is where we want to help the teachers, and very often in the school process, we have something that's called pre-referral intervention before you even get to teaching, before you even get to the testing part. And I do this in my practice where I do a consultation and I talk to, whether it's the parents, or I even have the opportunity sometimes to talk with the teachers, the student, and just get an understanding of what their challenges are, what they find easy, what they enjoy, and that gives me some clues about their learning style, about what's working, and sometimes on that level you can even come up with some strategies to see how they're working.
I agree with you. I think it's so important to understand with any situation what the gestalt looks like,
That's
what
right.
the whole looks like. How does this child interact at school versus at home?
Right.
Who does this child interact with? Where does he interact? Who does he interact with well? What are the ways they connect? Where does he or she have more problems? I keep using he because predominantly in schools it's boys, right, that have
They're referred more
challenges.
often, and it's generally a situation of the squeaky wheel gets
Yeah,
greased.
That's right.
So they often have more acting out problems, but and this is where it becomes, I think, a responsibility and hopefully a pleasure for the teacher to get to know all of the students and understand. And what you're talking about is like an ecological or systems approach, understanding how all these various systems impact on the children. And with this book that I was co-author, which is School Discipline and School Violence, it's all about consulting with teachers. And the two chapters that I was responsible for was the systems approach, the ecological approach.
Systems.
Yes. And very good.
I know.
And,
How about that?
And the biophysiological.
Okay.
So
let's talk about the ecological systems approach to this. Tell me about that.
Well, what I try to assist teachers in doing is to create the appropriate level of expectations and the appropriate climate in their classroom, whether it's from a kindergarten level, elementary school level, even in the community colleges or even in colleges, because so often we have students who just are not engaged in their learning.
Well, so let's talk about what that looks like. I mean, you know that I was a school teacher a very long time ago and taught graduate school and undergraduate school and now, speak all over. And I know, as well as you know, that anxiety inhibits learning. When we feel we're going to be punished, Dan Goleman said it best in his book, Emotional Intelligence. He said, stress makes us stupid. I wouldn't quite
like
go
that.
that far, but anxiety does, we attend to all those emotional factors inside, so we don't pay attention to what's happening, and so then people might think we're forgetting things, but really we didn't get them logged in because we couldn't pay attention because we were so upset inside. I mean, we've all been in those situations if somebody comes at us in a punishing situation. So you and I both know that people learn best when it's fun, when they can laugh, when it's fun, when it's interesting, and when it's safe.
Right.
So we have to start with a safe school and a safe classroom.
Yes, that's so true. And I think the other part that's often very missing is how is this lesson or how is this information relevant to me? How is this going to help me in my life?
Yes.
What does this have to do with what I want to do
Why
professionally?
do I have to know how to dissect a frog?
Right.
Somebody needs to explain to a kid in whatever class you do that here's why you want to learn to dissect a frog.
Right.
This is what you're going to learn. Isn't this exciting?
Yes.
If you find a nerve, we have those too inside of us, but you can't dissect us because we're not allowed to do that.
Well, not usually.
That's
Not
true.
usually. And I like the Madeline Hunter technique, which is a lesson plan that you can even download it on the internet, and it tells you how to set up your lesson plan, how to set up your objective, how to set up the relevance, so
to
that
make it relevant to a kid. So
Yes.
she actually
Yes.
gives you in this book school discipline and school
Violence.
violence.
how to prevent all those problems. We don't want you to have violence.
That's
we don't
very
want you to have
interesting.
problems.
You know, years ago I wrote a chapter in a book that Rosemary Mosier edited called Shocking Violence.
Yes,
And that was about,
toward that
after
committee.
2011,
Yes.
about violence in the school. I actually wrote on building resilience in kids. But
Yes.
so what does Madeline Hunter say in here about what's one thing we would go around setting up an environment that is conducive to learning?
Well, one thing that is so very important is to set up the expectations and to be very, very clear.
So to know your kids.
Know your kids and even write them out. Put them on the board or have a chart somewhere. Make a contract. These are the behaviors that I expect. I even do this in my position at Mercer County Community College, where I am running the Success Center, and I'm trying to help everybody have success there.
And I should have said that before.
That's
Valerie,
okay.
in addition to having a practice in Princeton and in Hamilton, does run the Success Center at Mercer County Community College. So there you go. Sorry.
Yes,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Sorry, doctor.
So I've just posted a tolerance and respect policy.
Good.
This is what we expect here, and we expect you to use common manners, to be careful about how you address people, not to gossip, keep your comments positive. If you have something that's not nice to say, don't say it at all. And to try to set up the expectations, the same thing in a classroom.
Well, you and I both know, since you have chaired the New Jersey Psych Association's Healthy Workplace Committee,
right.
and I've been happy to help you out with that somewhat, the importance of a positive workplace.
That's so true.
That, in fact, it's correlated, if you look at the positive psychology research, with increased productivity of somewhere between 10 and 25%. So, I mean, a classroom has to be the same.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's why these kinds of concepts work for both schools and employees all over.
Right.
This is important.
And so sometimes people are afraid to consult with psychologists because they think they're going to tell them something that's wrong or something. I think that's a natural feeling, right? But I know that as psychologists, we look at what's right because that's what you build on. And you're saying that some of those principles, especially from positive psychology, about building on the health of a situation, the health of a person, have transferred now into the classroom. And that's the first step. So let's say we've got that nailed, okay? Now I've got a pretty positive classroom except for this kid who's making me nuts, right? The challenging child. What do I do then?
Well, there are those children who don't respond to just the setting up of expectations and making clear all the consequences for not following these expectations, because there's about maybe a 2 to 5% incidence of children with learning disabilities or ADHD or other challenging problems, right? They're very often comorbid. So the idea of identifying that and understanding that and knowing how the diagnosis should occur, especially for things like ADHD.
Talk me through that. How would a diagnosis, let's say a teacher has a gut feeling, which is really all we ask the teacher to do.
Right.
And she or he makes a referral, right, to a child study team? Is that what the next step is?
Excuse me, often that's the case.
Okay.
But what happens very frequently is that the teacher will raise the issue with the parents.
Okay.
And they'll want the parents to bring the child to the pediatrician
Okay.
with the idea that they want the child medicated. And a lot of times, and I'm not saying this is true of our pediatricians in this area, but very often if you are only diagnosing this through a checklist kind of procedure, so many people would come up positive on that. Because
Well,
we
I'm
all
sure.
have aspects.
I'm sure, and I've always said, you know this, that I'm sure I would have had some diagnosis as a child in that little box in Ohio that girls were supposed to be in, and I couldn't stay in it. So I hear you saying that if there are real issues, you're not opposed to medication, but that's just part of the overall team approach. That's not the answer necessarily,
But
all by itself.
You have to know what you're dealing with. And I think it's so important to understand all of the different cognitive and emotional strengths and weaknesses. So instead of just using a checklist approach, I think it's so important to do a complete neuropsychological evaluation.
And who does that? What profession does neuropsychological evaluations?
Psychologists
That's
do.
right. So psychologists are trained in neuropsych eval.
Yeah, well, that's a
I'm
special
not,
training.
but you are.
Yes, it's a specialized training. I did
That's
a postdoc.
right. It is a specialized training. And my bonus daughter who also is trained as a neuropsychologist.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes.
And so you now know how to go about doing, as well as other psychologists, know how to go about doing the testing that lets you know what about that kid.
Well, it helps us to identify things such as what type of their memory works the best, how are they able to learn things better, what things aren't working. It does help us to identify if there are learning disabilities.
And one of the things that I've kind of learned from you, because I'm not an expert in this area at all, is that quite often you've told me that, and it makes sense to me, if I'm having some kind of a learning problem, I'm more likely to act out, and that can make it look like I have an attention problem, which I might have, but I might have both, or one or the other.
That is so true,
Yeah,
because
makes
the
sense.
emotions, the kids are aware of the fact that they're not keeping up with their peers, and they will have various levels of emotional reactions to that. So some kids will just be completely avoidant, some kids will just act out, become the class clown. I mean, there are so many different things
And
that
there's
you'll
a
see.
strength in that, but probably not in that class.
Probably not. Probably not. So it's important to have an understanding. And, you know, according to the types of tests that you use, I don't want to get too technical, but there are some types of testing that will highlight some of these learning disabilities better than others. So it's very, very important that you work with someone who's been trained in test construction and who understands what it is that you are getting when you utilize certain tests.
Because when we use tests, we have to make sure these tests are reliable, that they kind of test the same thing each time we give it,
That's
right?
right, that's right.
And we also have
And
to
valid.
look at, and valid, right?
Right.
How is this test constructed in a way that it is really measuring what it says
That's
it's
right.
measuring?
That's right.
And then does that happen over time, not just in a certain situation?
right.
And
That's
so
right.
these are sophisticated tests that psychologists use, and it's great to go to the pediatrician and get the pediatrician's idea. And I agree with you. I think pretty much any pediatrician I know is pretty sophisticated around these things.
Absolutely.
But that may not be the place someplace. So rather than just say checklist, 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 this kid has that, you're saying let's do the down and dirty. Let's get underneath this. Let's test what we have that's measurable about this child, and let's try to find out what the etiology is of this behavior. What is it that's underneath this behavior that may be leading us to where we are today? Okay.
And a lot of people in education would maybe refer to that as a functional assessment.
Okay.
You know, to understand what that behavior is serving for the child. What are they trying to communicate?
Sure.
And having an understanding of that, getting some ideas of what this child is struggling with, so that we can provide some type of, whether it's remediation or assistance or tutoring or...
So that if I'm really depressed, knowing that one of the things that happens sometimes when people are depressed is they're really cranky or really irritable. If we
and angry, yes.
and angry, right? And they blow up or whatever. Not that we can't all do these things and not be depressed.
Right.
But if that's a pattern of behavior,
Right.
rather than just looking at that behavior, trying to figure out why that kid has that behavior. That doesn't mean everybody's depressed that has that behavior, but tried to look at whatever behaviors they have. Why is that happening? Is what you're saying.
Right. And when you're working with the children, I mean, now we can, if we want to talk a little bit about doing more individual work with the child.
Well, so now we get to what do you call it? Do you call it a functional diagnosis? I mean, what do you call when you do all this testing and when you get done, what do you call that?
Well,
An assessment, obviously.
Right, it's a neuropsychological assessment.
And which is a document that spells out both behaviors and the underpinnings of those behaviors.
Yes, it measures all types of cognitive functions, all types of memory. It measures very many aspects of personality. It will take a look at their history, their health history. You know, in Pennsylvania, psychologists are trained differently than they are here in New Jersey, where here in New Jersey we have they call it the child study teams, which is made up of a learning consultant. You have a social work. In Pennsylvania, they don't chop up the child like that. The psychologist does the complete evaluation.
Oh, good.
Because the idea is that you want to be able to look at the entire picture yourself and not dole out these different parts to different people, because it's very, very important to get the entire picture yourself.
And while this show is filmed here in Princeton, it streams on the internet and is probably seen in some other states. Well, I mean, it can be seen any place on the internet. So what you're saying is that in various states, and probably governed by state law, who we go to and who we make a member of the team varies. And here in New Jersey, the child study team allows the psychologist to do most of this work, whereas in other states they might not. Now, another thing I know about New Jersey is, while I think it's great to use our schools, and we have very talented people working in our schools doing these kinds of things, parents can also seek outside the school to have the testing done. And is that always accepted by the schools if it's a licensed psychologist?
Almost always.
Okay.
In fact, I don't think I've encountered any situations where it hasn't been.
Right.
The thing is that schools are so overburdened right now, and there are so many students who require attention that there are very, very long waiting lists. And there is a difference in assessments between what the school will do and what a neuropsychological evaluation. It's not as comprehensive. It doesn't include as many parts.
And then if a kid is in a private school, they're probably not going to be able to afford to have all these services. And it's my understanding that in New Jersey, the public school will test for the private schools that are in their district. Is that correct? I might be wrong.
No.
Okay.
Not that I'm
so
aware.
then in a private school, then you need to get an outside resource.
Right.
Okay, fine.
That's right.
Okay.
Some of the parochial schools will
That's what I was
contract,
thinking of.
yes, they'll
They
contract
contract,
with some services.
From the
but-
public schools, right. Okay, but that just adds to the waiting list. So
That's
in a
right.
private school, you need to seek these resources outside.
That's right.
Right, okay, good. All right, so now we've done all that, and we've got the kid in the classroom. Now, you've been a classroom teacher. Now what?
Well, I think it's just so important for teachers or anybody who's working with anyone to have a personal connection.
Absolutely.
And, you know, with the way that our teaching loads go, you may have, especially in a high school, you would have 150, 200 kids a day.
Right.
And it's so hard to
Well,
get to know
it is.
everybody.
And I worry now because so many classes are done through the internet.
Oh,
I
yes.
mean, the good news is you get to connect with the teacher a lot.
Right.
The bad news is I just think you can't beat eyeball to eyeball.
No, no. And this is, I think, one of the problems that often leads to acting out or school violence is this feeling of alienation.
Sure.
That these kids are just part of an anonymous crowd, and then you get the problem, of course, of many other kids not being very pro-social and bullying and harassment.
We all need one person who cares about us.
That's right.
Better
That's
to have
right.
more, but sometimes
least
that
one.
one person is the educator
That's right.
who has set this in motion so for the child to get the support they need.
Yeah.
And now the educator who has that child in his class or her class, how does she or he go about connecting with that kid to get it started? Like, okay, so let's say we know the kid has ADHD and learning disabilities and poor socialization and is feeling angry or depressed because, it doesn't feel good not to succeed, which is why you talk about teaching for success. We all like success, all right? No kid wants to get in trouble. We all want to please. We all want to succeed. What's one or two steps you would do as an educator to sort of let those kids know there's a roadmap for success in this class?
Well, I think the climate and the tone that you set is the first step. And I think if you can learn their name and welcome them and look excited about being there yourself, that you're going to spread that excitement.
I agree. So we set the stage, educators set the stage with our feelings. And so here we are in tough economic times. And I have read, not an expert in this area, that a large class size is the leading problem in education today in terms of learning. And now you're taking it back to the basics, because you're saying, if I have all these kids, how do I get to know each kid that well? And if I don't know each kid that well, we don't make the connection. And if we don't make the connection, I can't meet that kid where he is. And if I can't meet he or she where he is, I can't take them down the road and show them how to be a success. That's really where it starts, right?
Absolutely
I
right.
agree.
And it's so sad just listening to that.
I know.
It's so sad.
I heard this
because
thing.
it's the truth.
Yeah, and I heard someone talking once about how you could take a mediocre teacher and give them a big class, and they'll probably be a mediocre teacher, but you can take a really great teacher and give them a big class and turn them into a mediocre teacher too. Not because they're not great, but because it's stretched too thin. So this is a big problem. So this is why we want a team, parents and educators. No parent can do it all. No educator can do it all.
Right.
And so we have to pull this team around us.
That's right. That's right. So making connections yourself with other parents, with your school team, with community members. I mean, there are many, many resources in your community. And it's just a question of trying to find them.
Right, and everybody working together on the team, knowing that one part of the team is really not more important than another part of the team, but we all have to have the same goal.
Right.
And so we've got to finish it up here, but let's talk about that. What's a goal? Let's say I've got a kid with significant learning disabilities who has ADHD, so they get a little thing called fishnet learning, where they pay attention here, they don't pay attention there, so they don't have a really good platform to build on, so that can lead to looking like learning problems anyway. And then the kids don't like them because they feel not successful, so maybe they act out or whatever. Let's talk about 2 or 3 solutions to this. What do we have as a goal?
Well, we want to, again, try to help the student to feel like they are competent and that they are able to meet the demands of the classroom.
So we want them to feel confident because self-esteem is built on feelings of competency.
That's right.
It's built on handling problems, dealing with situations. So to get their self-esteem go up, it's not saying to them, oh, you're wonderful. It's letting them see they can actually succeed.
That's right.
That's
right.
right.
And we also want to try and maybe even build a behavior plan where you can, and you want to do this privately, where you try to create some specific goals, like raising your hand or making sure that...
And based on positive stuff.
Yes.
B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning. When you do this, then you get this. If you can raise your hand and not have an outburst in the classroom, then you will get to use the computer for 15 minutes at the end, during recess or something like that,
Those are some of the techniques.
Right,
yes.
right, okay.
Yes.
All right. And then, so the good news is, and I know the good news, and let's end it up here, what's the future for a kid who's challenged?
Well, again, if you surround yourself with all of this assistance, and if you also try to reach out for all of this knowledge yourself, on October 1st, I'm having a mental health stigma. I'm partnering with the Governor's Council on Mental Health Stigma, and we are holding a mental health summit at Mercer County Community College so that we can present a lot of these hot trends, if you will, in education and in interventions and promoting success.
Absolutely, and knowing that we all have problems, and we all have strengths and things we're not so great at, I would say to you that the potential for all of us, regardless of what these issues might be, is endless and positive. We have to stay solution-based, not problem-based. Dr. Valerie Brooks-Klein is very solution-based here. And so as we have our kids in school this year, I want everyone to think about being solution-based, getting your team, going out to Mercer County to her mental health summit on October 1st. This is Dr. Valerie Brooks-Klein. Valerie ran a child study team, is a psychologist, both in Hamilton and in Princeton, and the Success, what's your title? Success Director or something?
Success Center, yes.
Of the Success Center out at Mercer County College, and co-authored the book School Discipline and School Violence along with Erwin Hyman. So thank you so much. I hope you guys had a great time listening to this. I'm going to say to you, we can all be successful in our own special ways. Take care of yourself. Thank you, Valerie. You're great. Have great fun, and let's all have a great school year.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.